The format of tonight's meeting is to have a guest speaker share their experience, strength and hope on how the Alcoholics Anonymous program of recovery is working in their lives for 15 to 20 minutes. Tonight we've asked Barry to share. Just say Barry.
Good day everybody, I'm Barry, I'm an alcoholic.
Hey Barry.
And I'm sober today, and I recently celebrated 24 years of continuous sobriety in this program. A day at a time, that's all it was. I'm not going to tell you my war story because my war story is no different from yours. I lied, I cheated. I couldn't keep relationships going, I kept jobs going, I was good some days and bad other days. I lived, I'm a bit like Alan Jones, I lived in delusions of grandeur, and, but I never said the things that he said about anybody. But he's getting his comeuppance, but we won't get political. I hate being political. What I do want to talk about, and I'm being very serious, and firstly, congratulations to the new people and people who are counting days, because this, as most of you know, has probably been the worst year of my life. The very, very worst year of my life. I lost my partner of 43 years at the end of last year, almost into this year. And about 7 weeks ago, I spent almost a month in Royal Melbourne, and with something they didn't know what it was to begin with. It was viral pneumonia. And I learned when I went, after I was released from hospital and went to have the final checkup, that when I got in there, the thoracic man looking after me said, "We didn't know whether it was worthwhile going ahead trying to save you because your vital organs had started to shut down," which I didn't know at the time because they put me into an induced coma for 5 days while they tried to sort it out, and they did sort it out, I'm happy to say. And it's because they sorted it out, and it's because I was able to survive these last 8 months. I want to tell you how I did it. I've always been a bit ambivalent about a higher power since I joined this program, although I know that when I came in, it was a higher power who got me here, and I think those of you who have heard my story know that I came to AA because when my wife first got cancer, and because my life had begun to spin out of control. I was an absolute fucking mess, as only an alcoholic can be, as you all were, losing bodily functions and, oh Jesus, the full fucking box and dice. But when Avril got sick, I thought I'd better do something about my drinking, and I went to see a local doctor who sent me to a shrink, who said, "I think you're an alcoholic." I told him, what I was up to. But he said, "I want you to go to AA, it's not for people like you." Having told me I'm an alcoholic, he said, "To go to AA, it's not for people like me." I can tell you how fucked in the head he was for a psychiatrist. So I went to AA, and he was right. I went full of denial, and I sort of accepted I was an alcoholic. Now, I have to admit that for the first 6 months of my sobriety, if you can call an alcoholic not drinking for 6 months and not doing a program for 6 months sobriety, that was me. But I didn't go back until, and I'll cut this part of it short, I was looking for something in a file for somebody, and an AA meetings book fell out of the file. I presume that when I got home from that first meeting, I threw it on the table, it was filed away, and I think I was about to drink that day, because in fact I know I was about to drink that day, but when that meetings book turned up, I realised that there was somebody somewhere put it there, and I put it down to a higher power. And I got myself a sponsor, and you new people, this is what happens. I got myself a sponsor, I got myself a home group, I started working the steps, and I worked them to the best of my ability, but not the best way I could. And for the next many, many years, I sailed along in AA, and I want to go back and concentrate on this year, because if ever anybody needed a higher power in his life, it was me this year. I was able to almost cope with the death of my wife. It was pretty tough. You know, she died just after Christmas, and we had a private burial for her. Then we had a memorial service for her. And in between her death and that memorial service, there was a lot of organising to do, and a lot of praying to do, and a lot of really clinging to step 3. That's what got me through. I really wrapped myself around the higher power and really begged that I could get through it, and I did. And then when this viral pneumonia hit me, I didn't know it had hit me. I'll give you the history of that. My daughter rang me and asked me would I collect her boys who were 6 and 8 from school one afternoon, which I often do. And I went and got them, and I have no recollection of taking them to their house and walking out and leaving them there by themselves and driving home to my place from one side of Melbourne to the other. No recollection whatsoever. My daughter rang me, and I could tell that there was something the matter. She said, you know, what are you doing? You know, where are you? I said, I'm at home. She said, well, you've left the boys at home by themselves. What if I'd had an accident? I said, what are you talking about? I haven't even seen the boys. Next thing, her partner turns up and says, you know, what's going on? I said, what do you mean, what's going on? You know, I was totally out of it, totally out of it. I told him to go home, very nicely. He's a big bloke, I didn't want to offend him. And when I got up the next morning, I knew he'd been there because there was some Chinese food in the fridge and he bought it. Anyhow, my daughter came to get me, and she made arrangement for me to see a doctor, and my temperature was 38.9 degrees, which is getting up to the death level. And I was rushed to Royal Melbourne and put in those induced comas. Now, you know, when I was drinking, I was often in induced comas, but not medical-induced comas, alcoholic-induced comas. I went for days not knowing what I was doing. When I came to, I didn't know where I was, and I was put in the intensive care section. I was a bit like Christopher Columbus, who when he left Portugal, he didn't know where he was going. When he got there to the New World, he didn't know where he was, and when he got back again, he didn't know where he'd been. And that was me while I was in Royal Melbourne Hospital. And they kept asking me my name, my date of birth, did I know where I was, and I know what was the matter with me, and I didn't have a clue what my name was, anything about it. But for the next 4 or 5 days, I just sailed along, and all of a sudden the program came to me. And all of a sudden I thought, I had better start thanking my higher power that I'm alive, because one of the nurses told me I was half dead when I came in. And I thought she was only having me on, but when I looked at her when she was telling me, I knew she was being serious. And then my daughter told me that they'd told her that it was touch and go. And I wasn't ready to die. And I really kept repeating that third step and the serenity prayer. And I wondered, I thought to myself, what am I doing? You know, I've never been like this before. But I just knew that unless I grabbed it with both arms, I might die, I might drink. I didn't want to die, I didn't want to drink, I still don't want to drink. And it's a funny thing, you know, in all that almost a quarter of a century, there are many people here who weren't born when I came into the program. In all that almost quarter of a century, it never occurred to me to have a drink. And, you know, there were good days, there were bad days, there were you know, my behaviour was unconscionable in many days. And I've never sort of shared this before, but I was married before I married Avril, very, very briefly, and I abandoned a son and a daughter, and I didn't see them for many, many years. I just walked out. The woman I married was an absolute fucking bitch. I've never met anybody. I have never met anybody so gross in all my life. And I used to work with her. I used to sit next to her. We were both journalists, and we started going out, and you know, the usual thing happened. Then she dropped the P word one day, and I thought, oh Jesus, you know, and I didn't not only love her, I didn't really like her. You know, the power of the penis does get to you sometimes. Anyhow, her mother, rang me up and said, "You have to marry my daughter. We can't have the the disgrace of her having a baby out of wedlock." And my own mother met her and said, "Well, never bring her into this house, please." So you can imagine how happy that marriage was. Anyhow, I did marry her, but all of a sudden I realised she wasn't pregnant at all. She only pretended she was. She was desperate to get a husband, even me, a drunk. When the 9 months passed and I got to 11 months, and I thought, well, this isn't a ghost pregnancy. She wasn't very big or anything, and I put it to her that she wasn't pregnant, and she admitted. So I just walked out. Now I lived, my conscience really pricked me about that, and unbeknownst to me, one of my children by Avril and me knew about Henry, my son, and they'd been in touch with him all those years, but he said, "Don't tell Dad. If he really wanted to get in touch with me, he will of his own volition." Now, as it turns out, he has the gene. I passed the gene on to him. He's been in NA for as many years as I've been in AA, and he was a very successful designer on the Sydney Morning Herald, and he got a huge payout when they started getting rid of people. And he went and did a course, and he's now a drug and alcohol counsellor and doing great jobs. Anyhow, I woke up one day in the hospital, and there he was, standing there in front of me, and I hadn't seen him. I hadn't seen him for years. When I went to Sydney, I used to go and stand outside the building where he worked and hoped I'd see him come out, because I didn't know what he looked like. He's now 50, and I recognised him. He had some of our family's features, and when I saw him standing there, we both burst into tears, and we had a long talk, and he said, "Have you found your higher power?" And I said, "Well, of course I have, because what are you doing here if I hadn't?" So that set him off again, and we both howled for about 20 minutes, and but it was rather touching. We now, all those years went by like a flash, and now I have a son I can love, and he rings me most days, and I think he's coming down in a couple of weekends, and I've got a beautiful granddaughter, his daughter, who's absolutely gorgeous, and he has several mistresses and several other children whom he's never bothered to marry, and he seems very happy. But I put, you might think I'm treating this lightly, but alcoholism is a dreadful bloody disease, and if you go around with a long face, I'm convinced you're going to drink again. I take my life and my alcoholism very seriously indeed, and this year, this hideous year, has convinced me that I have to take a higher power very seriously as well. And this week, after we farewell Brett on Monday, I haven't been able to get him off my mind, and I've often thought during the week how I feel guilty that I haven't told Brett this story. He and I weren't close, although we used to talk a lot. He used to ring me up sometimes, and he had his really intimate mates in the program, and I know, I'm looking at a few of them now, and I know how they worked the program, and how they would have told him in the words I'm using now what I'm telling you now, because I know how precious their higher power is to them. But Brett's demise is a wake-up call to every man in this room, because it could have been any one of us. It could have been any one of us. I've seen Brett when he's been so into the program, it's been unbelievable. So into the program. I've seen Brett where he didn't know whether he wanted to stay in the program or not. And, the blokes around here who loved him so much, I can imagine what they said: "Brett, come back, otherwise you'll drink." Well, we know the story of that, and for those of you who weren't there, his mother was, I presume that was his mother who did the eulogy, was it? How she could get up and make the eulogy she did for a dead son escapes me. It was the most beautiful, heartrending appreciation of a son I've ever heard in my life. And as a parent, and some of you are parents, you would agree with me that there could be nothing worse than outliving one of your own children, because it just upsets the balance of life. And as I was talking to Leo about this tonight, there's no word in any language for a parent who loses a child. There is no word. I often bag my parents from the floor because of my childhood, which was a strange childhood. It was what some people would call a privileged childhood, but it was lacking in love. And I had a brother who died, whom I remember very vividly and I still love. And I overheard my parents say it was a pity him and not me, which is very heavy shit for a young bloke to hear. And but I didn't know. I mean, ours is a family of these dark fucking secrets. You know, every year something comes out. And I was told by one of my cousins that my mother and father lost 2 daughters before I was born. Now, you know, they buried 3 children. No wonder they were half mad. I knew about one, I didn't know about the other 2. And part of my making amends to them, and the sponsor I had at the time when I told him, he said, "You're always telling people to write letters to dead people, to make amends to them." I went home and I wrote sort of about 20 pages to my mother and father apologising for the things I'd been saying to them. It sent me into a paroxysm of grief and crying for about 4 days, but it got it out of my system. Again, it was a higher power job. Look, I'm sorry to go on about this higher power thing, but all of a sudden, you know, if any of you have any doubts, get rid of them. Listen to those of us who have experienced the power of a higher power, because, you know, without this support I get from praying, from doing the steps, and particularly step 3, I say it all the time, and I'm still grieving for my wife, but again, that experience in hospital was a higher power job, because I can now talk about her without blubbering. You know, I'm still living in the same house and she's there all the time, and we're eventually getting rid of everything. Getting rid of the house. That means my daughter comes over and then she goes into paroxysms of tears when she's going through her mother's clothes. There are wardrobes full of stuff that have got to be got rid of, and we went and got rid of all the linen the other day and some of her clothes. But, this was a higher power job, that my higher power switched me off for a month while I could learn to grieve without getting too upset about Avril going. I miss her dreadfully, but they were. How she put up with me for 43 years is quite beyond me. I suppose that was a high power job too. I remember her mother saying to her when she said she was going to marry me, she said, "I think you're going to have a lot of fun with Barry, but I don't think you'll ever have a lot of money." She did it, made it a lot easier. My grandmother used to say to all of us, "Never marry for money, but marry where money is." And I say that to all you young people. It's a good maxim. I went through a lot of the money. We haven't any left now, but we had a lot of fun. That's my story. That's my story. It's, in getting on to this quarter of a century of sobriety, I'm very proud of the fact that I'm not proud of the fact that I was ambivalent about a higher power, because I always knew there was something great out there. Otherwise, I wouldn't come into these rooms and sit here and listen to you guys or have you listen to me. But now I'm more convinced than ever that I'm sort of just locked in the arms of a higher power who's going to look after me for the rest of my life, be it long or short. And what more could I wish? And thank you for letting me share.